Acknowledging that this week in our band, Galen and Sean, who have both been playing their instruments forever and a day, sharing their giftedness with us, and Chrissy, who happens to be married to the director of worship. The guitar, this is the first time she's ever played the guitar in front of a group of people. Yeah. It also lets you know that Jordan loves getting to work with accomplished musicians, and he loves getting to work with musicians who are brand new in their art and their craft, and is always happy to do that. I think he's had over 40 different people in the band since he started, which is really incredible. Some of you know this story about me. The year was 1993. I just turned 21. There was a day that I was 21 back in the day before some of you were born. And I was a sophomore at ISU. I had changed my major and studied abroad, so I was trying to decide whether I'd be responsible and take classes that summer so that I would be ahead and not have to take a fifth year. But I had stopped by Merge, the campus ministry, and I ran into the associate pastor of a church in town who asked if I'd be willing to go on the summer youth mission trip because he needed a female counselor on that trip. He didn't really know me. There should have been a background check or something. This would not happen in 2019, but in 1993, I found myself the next day going to get my JO2, which is that indication on your driver's license that lets you drive 10 to 15 high school students in a 15-passenger van. That's before we understood how easily those things could flip. Now, this is not a tragic story. No one was harmed in me driving anyone, no matter what people say about my driving. I started my career in driving youth and later college students in 15-passenger vans at that point in time. I was on this trip, and while there were the senior high students themselves convinced me to apply for this 10-hour youth position in their church. I think I have a picture. That's not from 93, but that's the next year, 1994. I'm the one in the sweater being given the bunny ears. I think we'd gone over to Peoria to go ice skating, because at the time we didn't have a place to go ice skating here in Bloomington Normal. Because I had the senior high job, or I'd already been offered it, I hadn't started, I thought it was only right that I'd go on the junior high trip as well. It was a weekend in Chicago. We stayed at Evanston First United Methodist Church, a gorgeous old building that's been kept in impeccable condition. At some point in the night, when I and the other adults on the trip, now I didn't have the job yet, so I wasn't the one accountable for this, but at some point that night, a group of junior high kids had snuck into the sanctuary. I mean, we're talking gorgeous, pristine sanctuary, and had a silly string fight. I hadn't even started my job. I had never worked in a church before, and I was banned from ever entering that sanctuary again. It's a little awkward because that's where the graduations for Garrett take place. So I've been there for 2 of my graduations and multiple other graduations, but every time I go in, I think, I've been banned from this place. At the time, the congregation that hired me worshiped 700 or 800 a Sunday. So they had 3 services. It was the early 90s. People still came to church and, the glory days. But there were 7 people in the youth group, 7. And 5 of them were going to graduate that year. I was a junior in college, and I thought, if I want to keep this job my senior year, I am going to have to learn how to do this thing. I mean, I'd been hired having never worked in a church, never led a youth ministry. I just liked Jesus. And I had fun with youth on this trip and drove the van and didn't kill them. So I needed to grow this thing fast. not because we needed to be the fastest growing youth group, not because I was all about growing. It was to keep it alive. That's been a theme in the ministries I've led over the years. When I said the thing about started with 2 people here at Hope, we don't have to be the largest church in town, but we want to keep this thing alive. That's part of our goal. That's not in our prayer statement, is it? That's not really a God-sized vision, but there are days where that is the goal of this church. So I had 7 kids, 5 of them were going to graduate. I asked for some help. And I was told about a youth workers training event. At the time, Youth Specialties had the corner on training all youth workers. And remember, this is 1993. So even though I was, and still am, I'm kind of in the middle of the Gen X generation, we were being trained at that point still how to connect with Gen Xers in youth group. That's how long ago that was. And there was a guy that got up there, and I want to show a picture of him. He looked like this. Now, I really appreciated that he looked like that because he kind of looked like my campus minister at the time. I also really appreciated that he looked like that because at the time, the only youth pastors that I knew of were men, and they looked really cool. And in fact, they were really cool. And I have always been self-confident with who I am, but I was and am a dork. And so there were no role models of how a dork could grow a youth ministry. And I really appreciated him because he was kind of a dork too. I was like, yes, dorks can be in ministry. It was, I'm sure that's not what he wanted his forever legacy to be, but I really appreciated it. The guy's name is Mike Yaconelli. And he said this. I sat down in the first, the opening worship, which at those events is always really, really good. Lots of good feelings. Sit down, and he stands up to preach and says, "Your church hired you to keep their kids nice and to make sure they have other nice kids to hang out with." And he said, that's not your job. It's possible that I was hired to keep a group of people nice and make sure they had the nice kids to hang out with. Because after all, you don't want the riffraff in your church, right? Oh, no. So he said this then. And I had forgotten that he said this until I was researching for this sermon, and all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, I heard this as a 21-year-old in 1993, and it's impacted everything I've done in ministry. He said, our role is not to create nice, compliant American citizens ready to get a good job and have 2.4 kids. Our job is to introduce young people to the life-ruining Jesus who causes nothing but trouble. This is the first training I get in ministry. And then he says this, and I thought, yes, I'm already there. It says, listen, if your church doesn't have a rule made just because of your youth ministry, like no soccer in the sanctuary or no orange punch in the fellowship hall, you aren't letting Jesus be first place in your ministry. Trouble should be the youth worker's middle name. Remember, all they can do is fire you. Isn't that awesome? That's how I've approached ministry since the beginning. And when I was rereading this, I thought, crap, am I the they now? Am I the they? Because I really don't want to be the they. And then I remembered, oh, wait, no, because tomorrow I'm going down to a rally in Carbondale, Illinois, where I've been invited by a large church down there to talk about why churches should be LGBTQ inclusive and how to become that if you are not. And they have put out press releases and invited all of the surrounding churches. And there is this myth that in Southern Illinois, everyone is conservative. And there are 66 people that formed this team and said, well, there's at least 66 of us that aren't, and we'd like you to come speak. And when they invited me, I said, oh, there are I'm pretty far left in terms of the church. There are other people who are more centrist, more calm, more caring about harmony and happiness. And they said, no, we watched you, we live streamed you, we want you. So I thought, hey, this maybe isn't the best career move for me to do this. It's not a secret to the powers that be that I'm doing this, but why wouldn't I do this? The worst they can do is fire me, right? Amen. Don't worry, I'm not leaving Hope Church. I suppose you all could fire me too, but not while we're still connected to the Methodist system, administrative, blah, 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 blah. All right, you don't care about that. We are supposed to be following this radically inclusive message of Jesus. It goes back to what I learned in 1993 from that guy. Our job is to introduce young people to the life-ruining Jesus who causes nothing but trouble. Yaconelli talked about not spending time in an office, which was no problem for me as a 21-year-old working in the church because I didn't have an office. I was given a box of materials with a couple of books on how to play games with teenagers and some files that told me the teenagers who should have but weren't coming to youth group, and I lived in a Young America college apartment. I'm popping a lot. Do you want me to use this? All right. We'll switch to this. Am I there? That means I can't move around, and that's going to be a problem for me. So now, remember, we were trying, in 1993, he was teaching people how to do ministry with Gen Xers. Now we're years ahead, but at that time, in the early 90s, he said, don't spend time in an office. You're not doing ministry if you're in an office. Now, I want to be clear. I really appreciate having a place to hang a calendar and put my books and keep myself a little bit organized. That has been amazing since we've been here. I had the first 5 years of Hope's creation, that was like stacked at my home and carried around in a huge bag, and it's really nice to have that in a central location. He said at the time that his office as a youth worker was the skate park, the football field, and McDonald's. I loved hearing that. And he said, if anyone tells you to hang out in the office for your job, you tell them that that's not where the youth that you're supposed to be reaching are. The worst they can do is fire you, right? So I paid attention to that. And my office is here, but it's still not here. It's the Bistro. It's a Bloomington Pride Fest. It's the Sweet Corn Blues Fest. It's the places where people are, bars and coffee shops. And this week, my office included the McLean County Democratic headquarters, where both Val Lehman and Jackie Gunderson announced that they are running for the McLean County Board in their districts. Yay! We're very excited. Now, if you're sitting here thinking, ooh, that's uncomfortable. She mentioned Democrats. We said this is a church where your political affiliation does not matter. They would both be thrilled for Republicans and Libertarians and Green Party people to celebrate their to join in celebrating their run for county board. We're just excited that Hope Church has people who are willing to step into strong leadership like this. Over the years, I paid attention to Yaconelli. Though he was the leader of the largest youth ministry resource in the U.S., he prided himself as the pastor of the slowest growing church. And he invested as much time in that small church as he did in youth specialties. And in fact, he was kind of destroying the business model for youth specialties, because what they did was sold curriculum and programming, and he'd started to believe that programming was not discipleship, that programming didn't help people grow in their faith at all. So he was teaching that, and they were like, we're not going to be able to sell our products. He was like, I don't care. I'm not called to be a business person. I am called to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. Gen Xers had become adults in the early 2000s, and it was this weird group of people called the millennials who were coming into youth ministry, and he was figuring out that people had stopped coming to church and that programming wasn't helping people live a radical life of discipleship. And so he began to think about what he called the emergent Christianity, and think about how worship and discipleship could be different. And at that time, he published this book called Messy Spirituality. And I read it from cover to cover, which is not that impressive because it's only like 50 pages. And I reread it from cover to cover every year, which is still not that impressive because it's like 50 pages. He wrote that in 2002. In 2003, he died tragically in a car accident. So that was his last writing, his last gift to us. But I reread that book, and I know that not only did his initial words to me in 1993, but those words in the book Messy Spirituality in 2002 continue to echo through the years and have impacted and influenced who we are as Hope Church. Part of why I say that is this. In Messy Spirituality, he wants to teach people how to be Christian, how to grow in your faith. And that sounds good, doesn't it? I mean, if we right now said, time out, this is no longer a church service, this is a committee meeting, and you're all on the discipleship committee. And we are going to make a decision using Robert's Rules of Order to create a discipleship system at Hope Church. Go. And we would come up with a list of things that we thought discipleship was. And we'd have a beautiful mission statement, and it would probably sound really good, and absolutely no one in this room would follow it ever. It would just sound good. Because spirituality, our growing in faith with God, doesn't work based on a fixed program, does it? First, you take Spirituality 101, then you take Christian Growth 101, and then you take 201, and then you take 301, and you just are getting closer and closer to God. Has that worked for anyone in your faith life? Has anyone really gotten closer? It doesn't work because it's not what our lives look like, does it? Like, you wake up, you haven't had coffee yet, and you don't like anyone, including God. And then maybe you have some coffee or some water or whatever it is that, if you're healthy and you're rehydrating after the night, and you take a walk. Maybe you're feeling better, and on that walk, you notice the beautiful fall colors, and the birds are singing, and you see the children running, and man, you think this is what life is about. And then you walk back in your door, and you have an argument with the person that you live with. Boom, you're back down. You don't feel close to God, you don't feel close to people. Okay, get out the door. You make it to your job. Wow, early win in the day. Oh, someone just came in and yelled at you. And your day more looks like this, doesn't it? I mean, maybe some of you have days that are all gloriously uphill, and it's fantastic. And when you go to bed at night, you feel like, I could not be closer to God and the people I love. Tomorrow, I'll start here, and I'll get even closer and closer. I haven't met anyone for whom that's reality. Our spiritual lives look more like this, don't they? And even if we were back to that committee thing, and I were to ask you all and to write a definition, what does it mean to be spiritual? And we would begin either to think of like hippy dippy, or like awesome, loving monk in the desert, or we'd have some image of like a perfect Christian person, whatever that looks like, and it may not look like anyone for us. Yaconelli says this: spirituality looks like whatever you and I look like when we're thinking about Jesus. So think about all the faces you could be making when you're thinking about Jesus. It could be really ugly. What doesn't matter. Spirituality looks like whatever you and I look like when we're thinking about Jesus, when we're trying to find Jesus, when we're trying to figure out what real Christianity looks like in the world. He says spirituality, or if you want to call it Christian growth in your faith, it's not about being fixed. It's about God's being present in the midst of our unfixedness. Okay, I actually believe that. And if you would go back through the sermons that we've preached over the last 5 years, we say that time and time again. Where is God? How is God answering our prayers? And time again, we talk about God's presence being that which is the gift from God, that nudge that we feel, that moment of calm or peace that we feel in the midst of the worst times in our lives, God being right there with us. In the midst of our best times in our life, God celebrating with us. Spirituality is not about being fixed. It's about God being present in the mess of our unfixedness. And he says this, the truth is, we're all a mess. I mean, maybe there's like 3 of you here who aren't a mess and you have it going on, you have it figured out. But none of us are who we appear to be. We all have secrets. We all have issues. We all struggle from time to time. No one is perfect, not one. And he says, I've just paraphrased Romans 3:10. The essence of messy spirituality is the refusal to pretend, to lie, or to allow others to believe we are something we are not. Unfortunately, people can handle the most difficult issues more easily. Man, something just showed up on my screen, and I want it to go away. Hey, there we go. Unfortunately, the truth is we're all a mess. Okay, we got that. Unfortunately, people can handle the most difficult issues more easily than they can handle the lack of pretending. When you and I stop pretending, we expose the pretending of everyone else. The bubble of the perfect Christian life is burst, and we all must face the reality of our brokenness. That, if I could say, what prompted you to want to start any ministry that you started? That first youth ministry, the campus ministry that I led, this church, it's that we could break that bubble of pretend Christian perfection, and that we all can be exactly who we are. If there were a drinking game about us, you would be drunk the number of times you heard me say the word authentic, because I mean that, both from campus ministry and here at Hope Church. And I say that because I really want us to be our authentic selves. And what does that mean? Maybe some of us are like, I couldn't even be sitting still in this chair if I were actually being my authentic self right now. So even in a place where we try to encourage everyone to be exactly who they are, it's hard. Yaconelli talks about how when you create a space for everyone to be exactly who they are, programming doesn't work. Programming doesn't work. You notice the things that I advertised today? One of them was about leading worship for the baby fold. This is children who have been in their schools, haven't made it in any other school, and they end up in this school. We're going to help lead worship there. People who are a mess, people who are imperfect, people who are doing it together. We're also working with, we said, let's build a relationship, a bridge of hope with someone who will get to choose us, who does not currently have a home, will be rapidly rehoused into an apartment, and our role really is to be in relationship with that person, to let that person know that there are a group of people who care about them, who are their support, who says, yeah, You can do this. It seems so obvious, doesn't it? It seems so easy. And yet, a lot of the times, the reason why people who have been unhoused and receive housing don't stay there is because there is absolutely no support whatsoever. We're saying that we want to be support. That's not a Christian education program. That is us living the radical love of Jesus, right? That is us living the radical love of Jesus. And we might just help a person or two, but perhaps this will spread to churches throughout Bloomington Normal. But it does require us to just be who we are. You know, that's when people are going to open up to us, right? Isn't that when we open up to each other? When we sense that the person that you're talking to is being real, when you sense that what's being said is being real, how do you grow in your faith? You start by just being real. And then here's the scandal. There is this God who loves us unconditionally. This God who loves us unconditionally. It's that scandal of grace. Yaconelli said it this way, and I think I have a slide for this. Spirituality is not a formula. It's not a test. Darn it, for those of us in the room that like getting A's, it's not a test. Spirituality is not about a competency. It's about intimacy. Spirituality is not about perfection. It is about connection. Spirituality is not about perfection. It's about connection. He continues, the way of the spiritual life begins where we are right now. There's nothing that you have to do to begin to have a connection with God. There's nothing that you have to organize. There's nothing that you have, I have this dream that I could run. I know running isn't that high of a dream, but that's where I am with my physical goals. We're talking about spiritual goals here. I had decided that I couldn't do this until I owned headphones. So I bought headphones 3 weeks ago. Earlier this week, I bought shoes. I wore them at home yesterday. I keep thinking, well, and then I've got to figure out when I'm going to do this. And, running just starts with walking. That's all I need to do now is go outside and walk, and I'd be achieving that goal. But I keep thinking I need to organize something to start doing it. That's our spiritual life, too. That's ridiculous about being physically healthy that I would do that. The same is true for our spiritual life. We don't have to figure out what we believe or don't believe. We don't have to decide which church we want to belong to. We don't have to decide anything. We just have to be who we are right now and have an openness to the Spirit that's around and in all of us. Just be who you are right now. Some of the rest of that may or may not come, but all you have to do is be who you are right now. Open yourself up to that to begin to lead this spiritual life. In this church, it is a Christian church, and so we teach spirituality through the lens of a life in Jesus Christ. And we have as part of our prayer statement that we're all learning to live a Christ-centered life. So we figure out who it is that Christ was, and then how do we live a Christ-centered life. For the next 3 weeks, we're going to do that by looking at what's called the 3 simple rules, and they're really simple. The 3 simple rules. So if you're worried that in talking about spirituality, you're going to keep coming to church and you're going to have a list of to-dos or shoulds or what you have to sign up for or what you have to do or how you have to do it or what shoes you need to buy or what headphones you need. I mean, maybe you'll find a good spiritual podcast that you want. I don't know, but you don't have to do any of that. We're going to talk about 3 simple rules to grow in your faith. And I shared that with Ryan. He's the one, my husband, who created that image. And he said he kind of liked it because that's not where you expect flowers to grow in a tire. And even the brick wall isn't perfect. There's some goopy thing on it. I don't know what. So it's like acknowledging the mess of our lives and then growing. And we're going to identify 3 simple rules to grow in our faith. Spirituality is not a formula, it's not a test, it's not a relationship. I often think, man, by this point in my life, I ought to have it down. And in Messy Spirituality, Yaconelli says, think about it. Jesus spent 3 years trying to help 12 people build a relationship with him. One of them instantly betrayed him, and the other 11 spent the rest of their lives trying to define what discipleship even is. Why in the world do we think we need to do more than Jesus or those first disciples? I don't know. It's something about the way we structure our lives with programs and advancements, and that's just not realistic to who we have been created by God to be. It's God who created us, a God who understands that there is day and there is night. A God who understands that life is good and life is not good. A God who understands who we are and how we are created. I've shared with you before that all 4 Gospels share the story of the feeding of the 5,000 plus women and children, so probably 15, 20,000. That's in all 4 of the Gospels. In 2 of the Gospels, right after the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus says, okay, I've done this. You know, that seems like wow, we have to be like Jesus. We always have to be out there feeding people. Well, sometimes, but then the next thing Jesus does is get in a boat and go away to pray. And he goes up on a mountain and he prays all night. And the disciples just had to hang out in the boat and sleep. But you know, there's a story that it got stormy and the boat began to rock and they were scared. And it's in Matthew, and Jesus says he comes down off the mountain and he begins to walk on water, and they think it's a ghost. These 12 who had spent time all the time with Jesus, they still didn't trust that it was Jesus. And so Jesus was trying to say, hey, look at me. You guys don't yet understand that I'm God, but I'm walking on water, so now you can understand it. But instead of them having this epiphany moment of, oh, Jesus is God, that's what he was expecting. Instead of that epiphany moment, there was this, are you a ghost? And Jesus had to be like, actually, the Greek is I am, which reminds us of when God spoke to Moses and God said to Moses, I am. So Jesus says, I am. Don't be afraid. And then the very next thing that happens is Peter, who's the overachieving disciple, right, says, all right, well, if you're all that, I need to be able to walk on water also. And he gets out of the boat and he starts walking on water and then he sinks and Jesus saves him. But he did it for a couple of steps. That's spirituality. That is the model of spirituality we have. The people who actually got to spend all day, every day with Jesus still didn't recognize when it was Jesus and were still scared to live out their faith. And Jesus still loved them and supported them and protected them and was there with them. That's the spirituality that we're a part of. That's how we can grow in our faith. And so I hope that over these next 3 weeks that you'll hang out with us either in person or online, because these 3 simple rules, I think, are going to make an impact in who we are as individuals and who we are collectively as a church into the future. And we're not rolling out any program. We're just sharing these 3 simple rules for Christian living. They're all based in grace, that unconditional love of God. And let me tell you, there is nothing that makes church people more mad than grace. You know why? Because you want it for yourself, but as soon as you're on the inside, you want to define who else gets it, right? And who's not living such that they have it. And then we have to remember this spirituality, this messy spirituality, this life of faith is available to all people. And that's why living this faith is scandalous, hard, ridiculous. That's why we get to open ourselves up to this. And I invite you to pray with me. God, we thank you that spirituality is as easy as being present with you. We pray that this morning in worship we offer at least a couple of moments which we are present with the living God, which we can feel you with us. We see those around us and know that you are love. God, we open ourselves up to you and pray that you come into our lives or make us aware of the ways in which your Spirit is already present in us, living, thriving, unconditionally loving us. We thank you that you understand the ways in which we live our lives in a messy way. And we pray that with every decision we make, that decision may be more in line with who you are, O God, more in line with that which you offer to us, so that we may more fully receive all that you have to give to us. In your name we pray. Amen.